All right. Well, it's 11:31. We may have a few more folks jumping on. This is an event that we like to intentionally do every year. We record this conversation just to put the information out there. Some of these things that we talk about aren't necessarily the most glamorous topics, but they're very important for our community at large to just understand. And we feel like our role as the economic development organization for the community is to partner with the whole community team to just have this dialogue and make it available to our business partners as we move forward in a new fiscal year with just some really interesting, quite frankly, some interesting challenges based on the year that we've been through. So thank you for joining us. We have with us today representatives from really a good portion of our entire team. And we also have some legislators that will be joining us to hopefully engage in some Q&A towards the end. I see Representative McClintock is on, and we'll watch for others to join us as well. So Janelle Brower, Superintendent of the Marion Independent School District, is with us. Nathan Weir, Associate Superintendent with the Linn-Mar Community School District, is with us. And then Lon Pluckon, our City Manager, is also with us. So we reflect on the past year, the two big things here in our community, obviously the pandemic, and there are some major implications to that as it relates to some of the things the schools are going to be talking about. And then on top of that, the derecho. I know that Lon has a slide, kind of what's going on with that and how's that impacting our community, not just from what you see and we all see as far as how we see recovery. What are the financial implications on a community when we talk about that event as well? So many dynamics. I'm going to step aside and we're going to start with the school districts. Nathan and Janelle have done a great job kind of combining their presentation here this year. So I'll go ahead and put that screen up and turn it over to those two. And you guys tell me when we'll change the sides to keep up with you. So thank you both of you for being here today.
Yeah, sounds good, Nick. Thanks. All right, well, we just want to do some quick introductions. So like Nick said, my name is Nathan Weir. I'm the Associate Superintendent with the Linn-Mar Community School District. I'm sitting in for Shannon today. So Janelle and I have worked on these slides and have some good information to share, kind of just a status update of where we're at as a district.
And I'm Janelle Brower. I'm the superintendent for Marion Independent School District. Just really appreciate the partnership and being able to co-present. I hope that's one thing that you will see as we move through slides, is that our two districts, although separate, and I think we make each other better, we do partner in a lot of things very, very well. And so just appreciate the opportunity. We felt like, there's only so much tax information you can handle at one time. So if we put it together, you don't get to hear the same thing twice.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So hopefully we can cover this efficiently. So one of the things that we wanted to do was just share a snapshot of the demographics of really our Iowa schools, and Marion and Linn-Mar really mirror those demographics as well. But there's definitely some changing as far as the demographics of the students that we enroll in our schools. So you can see on the screen there some of the statewide numbers. Obviously increases in our minority student enrollment and our students that are eligible for free and reduced lunch. So, for those of you that maybe are unfamiliar, if you remember in the schools, our free and reduced lunch, that's how we kind of measure the poverty rates or the socioeconomic status of our students in our district. So, the special ed has stayed fairly the same amount over the past years, but we are seeing an increase also in our English language learners. So, being able to provide services that really target those specific groups of populations as they change across the state, continues to be a challenge for us. On the next slide there, it just shows a little bit of Linn-Mar specific demographics. And again, I would just, echo that we're close to the state average. And in some of those areas, we have 22.5% minority students. Our ELL population there is at 2.3. And then our free and reduced rate is 21.2% of our students. So that does vary a little bit amongst our buildings. Some of our elementaries have a little bit higher free and reduced lunch rate, and some of our other elementaries have a little bit lower free and reduced lunch rate, but really are pretty average in by the time they feed into our intermediate, middle, and high schools. You can see our graduation rate there. They are just in the process of updating it for this current year. And then our 9-12 dropout rate. And one of the things I just point out real quick is that you're always like, well, why don't those numbers add up right? The state uses a really interesting formula for students in that 4-year graduation rate. It will probably never be 100% because our students that require special ed services, the school district serves those kids for up to 3 years past their possible end of high school. And the state does not count those students as graduated until they're finished with that program. Services are provided by the school district up to the age of 21 for our special education students. So that's why just sometimes that graduation rate can be affected there. But you can see we're fairly proud of that, getting kids through and having a really low dropout rate. And then our ACT scores on there as well.
So similarly in Marion, again, our demographics really pretty closely mirror the state as a whole. One uniqueness for our district is that we do have the largest homeschool assistance program in the state. That program is right around 1,100 students. Our total number of student bodies is just over 3,000, but our district enrollment count is about 2,000. And the reason for that is our homeschool assistance program, when it comes to funding, each student in that program counts funding-wise as a 0.3. I will highlight in that program, that does not mean that 1,100 Marion residents are homeschooling. We actually have right at 100 students who are resident Marion students in that program, and then just over 1,000 students who are open enrolled from districts really throughout the area. We cap our enrollment, our open enrollment distance for that program at 45 miles. So that way we're drawing from an area around our district, but certainly not statewide. Other things I'll highlight there, the graduation rate, as Nathan mentioned, we're similar in both districts, but one thing I think it's important to know is the state of Iowa has the highest graduation rate nationwide. So not only do we have the highest graduation rate in the state, but both of our districts have or in the nation, I mean, but both of our districts have graduation rates that are above the state average as well. So certainly, I think that's indicative of the quality of schools that we have in this area. Another thing just to be aware of, the ACT composite, we do have some uniquenesses with ACT because of COVID, where number one, the end of the year, ACT was not offered for many of our students, that really was closed down. Also, the 4-year institutions last year in response did not require ACT as one of the components for admittance. So that certainly had an impact on the number of students who took the ACT, and then as well can impact that overall composite score.
Okay, good. On next, we wanted to just talk a little bit about how our local school districts just interface and work with other government agencies. And so we actually in Linn-Mar have our school board members sit on various committees and organizations throughout the community. So I know that we stay really up to speed with the city of Marion on growth and development, tax situations that would come up between the city and the school district, those types of things. And then our board routinely reports out at our board meetings that we have twice a month on just updates with that, because our ultimate goal is we really want to be good partners with our community and understand the situation of where everybody else is. I know Janelle and Shannon, the two superintendents, meet on a regular basis just to talk about things and touch base. We really value that collaboration with Marion, and I know Shannon would echo that as well, that our relationship with Janelle and her staff really strengthens our whole community. And so we take a lot of pride in trying to collaborate, and you'll hear some more throughout the presentation on some things that we're actually going to try to do together as school districts. We try to stay up to speed on construction. Obviously, Linmar went through a lot of construction projects. So talking about, how it's going to impact sidewalks and roadways and all of those things. And then with Marion's bond issue that I know Janelle is going to talk more about, there will be some more collaboration that their district will be doing with that as well. And then we just try to stay up to speed on the TIF and how the tax impact, plays out across the community. So you see a lot of that. And thankfully, we're in a community with the bond issues passing, like I said, and new facilities where, that collaboration is really important. That just helps us stay focused on our growth and at the same time be able to manage our enrollment trends.
All right, so now to the how does school finance work? School finance is a unique beast, to be very honest. It does not operate like my checking and savings account or your own checkbook. What you see here on this slide is the various funds, or sometimes you'll hear them referred to as buckets within school finance. And the way these funds work, you cannot move funds back and forth between different accounts. So the general fund is used for specific purposes. The money that goes into that fund is used for things in that fund. Same with management fund and so on. The only two that really are allowed to move back and forth are specific to construction projects. So where you see kind of in the middle of the slide, the capital projects as well as debt services. The capital projects account is where our bond proceeds. So when there's a GO bond, as Marion just passed and not long ago Linmar has, that's the fund where those proceeds go into. And then those are paid out through debt services. So those are really the only two funds that do kind of work together. The general fund is really the bulk of our funding. General fund is where we pay things such as salaries, benefits, and just general supplies. Some of our maybe utilities or upkeep, but 80% on average across school districts of the general fund money pays for salaries. So when we talk general fund expenses and we need to make cuts in general fund because of just amount of available funding, keep in mind that just like shutting the lights off and looking at those small scale changes really does not have much of an impact. We're really talking staffing as 80% of that fund. Management fund would be used for things such as early retirement benefits, as well as our liability insurance. The Pearl Fund, and this is one that Marion does not have, Linmar does. So there's only a few districts across the state that have the Pearl Fund, and that is, and Nathan, you feel free to chime in here a little bit more, but really specific to playground outdoor spaces. Capital Fund is specifically used towards construction. It might be school buses, technology, and general construction funds. That is you might hear it referred to as kind of that sales tax fund as well, or penny sales tax. Services, as I mentioned, that's where bonds would be paid out of. So principal and interest would be within that account. Capital projects are where our bond proceeds would go. Student activity fund is very specific just to the student activities, extracurricular activities. Money can only be paid in and out of that specific account. Our nutrition fund, so school breakfast and lunch, all of our food service must be managed out of that account. So money that we take in through meal payments as well as state funding has to cover all of the expenses, both for food and staff and equipment within that fund. And then our other enterprise fund. You'll notice on the highlighted portion underneath that yellow property tax levying funds, those are the only funds that impact property taxes. So those, once in a while, we'll refer to them as those are the levers we can pull or adjust in order to really maintain our tax rate at a steady rate. So we try and be really careful that we are not making major changes that would dramatically increase taxes on a given year. And quite frankly, also on the flip side, not to dramatically decrease and then rebound taxes in the next year. People might thank you for lowering taxes, but they rarely thank you to come back and increase them a little bit the next year. So we do try and be careful with that as well.
So on the next slide, as we look at school finance, like Janelle was mentioning, there's really just two sources of revenue for the school district. So our state general fund, you often hear that referred to in the news and media as the SSA or the supplemental state aid. That's simply the money we get from the state. And then we have our locally raised property taxes, which Janelle had mentioned. One other thing that I think is important to know from a tax and kind of funding and how we spend money at the school district level is that, it's different from cities and counties in the fact that cities and counties can really spend money as long as the law says there's not a reason to spend money on that, they can generally spend in those areas. Schools are different, and we can only spend funds if it specifically says we can spend those funds. So if there's something outside of a fund that's not listed in code, then schools typically aren't allowed to make that expense. So that's just, some of the differences that we have from our city and county government. What's really important, and we're going to look at some trends here on the next slides, but that we have figured we need about 3.25% to about 3.75% increase every year in our state aid to just keep up with the cost of living increases. And obviously that's not been happening, and Janelle's going to get into that a little bit more, but I would just echo what she said. Really, the only way we can manage our funds if we need to make cuts is with staff, because that's just the bulk of where the expenditures rest in our general fund.
So can you back up one slide? Sorry, Nick. Thanks. This slide and the next one just provide a historical view of what SSA or supplemental state aid has looked like. So you may have heard recently that our legislators settled this year at 2.4% increase for schools. That is really what makes up, there's two things that factor into how much money we take in on a given year. It's SSA, so this percent, along with our student enrollment. So when enrollment goes down, that has an impact on the amount of student or amount of funding that we would have from year to year. And I believe Nathan will talk a little bit more about the impact on that at Linn-Mar here. What you will see here is 2.4% increase is what it was agreed on for this coming year, which you'll note is the highest percent as we have had in several years. What this slide doesn't show, however, is with COVID statewide, we were down approximately 6,000, actually just over 6,000 students across the state. And that's for a variety of reasons. It's anything from families who chose not to send their kindergarten or preschool children to school this year, that they waited a year. Unfortunately, students who may have been on the verge of dropout and did drop out when COVID hit, families that have chosen to homeschool this year, but anticipate coming back. And so that 2.4%, although it looks as though it's the highest, it actually will be the lowest total amount when you multiply that by the number of students as we have had in those collective years as well. So the 2.4% helps us identify what the per pupil dollar amount will be. This coming year, it will be just over $7,000 per student. So this shows a little bit longer history of SSA percentages. You'll see that blue line showing the downward trend. And as Nathan previously mentioned, statewide, we've really tried to focus on what is the amount that we need just to maintain staffing when we consider cost of living increases, keeping in mind that 80% of our budget is staff. So on average, it's a 3.25 to 3.75% increase in the amount that we have going out annually, just as we consider staff increases. And you'll note that we certainly are not keeping track with that over time with SSA. That does have a long-term impact on what we're able to provide in programming. So as we advocate for increased SSA, it really is important to note that that increased SSA is not just so that we can do more, it's so that we can maintain and not end up cutting programming that really is intended to serve our students and meet those needs, especially as we look at ELL populations increasing across the state, special education services increasing. Those resources require funding. And so I just want to make sure that that SSA percentage is something that makes sense from a why is that important for school budgets.
Yeah, so then as we take a look at our enrollment, we just want to provide a quick snapshot of where we're at. So you can see Linmar's enrollment for this school year was down from where we had been in the past, and we had been projecting about a growth of 100 students. We actually ended up with a loss of 77, which is just around 1% of our students for us, but that translates into almost $600,000. And really, I think just anecdotally, I don't have proof of this, but just what we've heard from a lot of families is I really think the derecho impacted our enrollment more than COVID did. We've lost a lot of families with the loss in housing. And so, we expect to bounce back, but that's just a look at, the factors with the pandemic and derecho where enrollment was for Linmar.
Nathan, can you talk about, I'm looking at this slide and you're saying the enrollment drop is this year, but you've got 2022 on there. Talk about the fact that enrollment this year is what impacts next year, regardless of how many of those kids come back next year, right?
Right. Sorry, I should have mentioned that. So yeah, our funding was going to be based off of our October 2020 count date. So on October 1st, we count all of our students, and then that will lead us into the funding for the future. So, our school funding always is a year behind. So, we won't even see an impact if we increase students this next year until the following year's budget. And so, yeah, that's just a little tricky, and that's why those dates are aligned on there like they are.
Marion was uniquely not affected in the same way as many districts across our state. We did not see a declining enrollment this year. We were able to hold steady. So we're still waiting to see what preschool and kindergarten enrollment looks like for the upcoming year. One thing I do want to highlight, we talk about our enrollment trends being pretty steady over time, and they have been. However, our homeschool population has been, at one point, homeschool students were counted as a 0.6 in the funding formula, and then that was reduced to a 0.3. And so even though just student bodies have maintained, it does make our data kind of have some fluctuations there as well. So Nathan and I are going to tag team the next couple slides a little bit here, but when we talk about how property taxes really impact school funding, it's important to know what the impact is of taxable valuations. So what we look at is across the district, what is the total, basically what's the total tax value of property within that district divided by the number of students. Both of our districts are what would be considered statewide as property poor districts. In other words, the total dollar amount of the aggregate properties is less than many other areas across many other districts across the state. So you'll see that tax value rank in the middle column there. That rank is one that is I'm going to make sure I'm looking at this correctly, that the higher the number, basically I'll use the term that the lower your valuations are. So the more property poor your district would be considered. As you'll see there, Linn-Mar is 280th, Marion is 309th. That's out of a total of 330 districts across the state. Some of what impacts that statewide, we obviously have a large base of farming or agricultural land across the state. And so that can have a significant impact on valuations. That is not something that Marion has 0% agricultural land, and I believe Linn-Mar's is quite low. What happens as a result then is districts such as ours that would be considered property poor end up having higher tax rates to be able to take in the dollar amount needed based on the value of property. So you see that the tax rate rank is in the other order. In other words, the lower your number, the higher your tax amount for your patrons. So in that case, and these vary just a little bit year to year, but Linn-Mar and Marion are always pretty close here, ranked 17th and 20th. And so that does certainly have an impact on our taxpayers. Our tax rate at both of us very close to $18. And then one other difference to note, the income surtax. There are two areas within our funds that income surtax plays in. It's both on that PEPL or physical plant equipment levy, as well as the instructional support levy. For districts who have an income surtax, we are required, so once that's in place, it has to stay. Marion has to keep that income surtax. We have to tax at least 1 penny for the ISL and the PEPL. Marion taxes the lowest we possibly can, but we're required to include 1 cent on each of those. So that is a difference certainly to be aware of in the two districts. Nathan, I don't know if you want to highlight anything else on that one.
No, you hit that one out of the park. Nice job with that. That was great. We just, on the next slide, it's just a visual representation of what Janelle was talking about. So you can clearly see out in Western Iowa, where there's rich agricultural land, where those districts have certainly a higher taxable valuation. And you know, when Janelle and I were talking about this, Okoboji, I think, is the school district in Iowa that has the lowest tax rate. I believe it's under $10, but again, that's because their dollar per thousand of taxable valuation raises so much more money than the property poor district. So it's just something to think about, because even though we're in a nice urban area, we're still considered, you know, a property poor district. So taking a look on the next slide then at our property tax rates, you can see there where Linn-Mar is, and I believe that's for next year. I forgot to ask JT about that, but and then you can see, right, Janelle, isn't that our updated tax rate?
Yep.
Yeah. So again, what we wanted to just show with this was the levy rate in each of those funds or those buckets that Janelle mentioned earlier. And then you see the little diagram there for tax levy control. And I think this is really important to understand too, that local school boards that are elected to manage the budget really only have control over 27% of the funding, because a lot of this is generated by our school aid formula, and we don't really have control over where that tax rate goes. So there are some things that are obviously voter, like an additional PEPL or any bond votes, obviously for the debt. But really the local school board does not have, you know, control over 100% of that tax levy rate. I would mention too, just in our general fund budget, our rate for this year was $88,965,000. So we're just under 90 million for our general fund operating budget.
All right, for Marion, I included both this current year as well as the projections for next year. And the reason for that is specifically just to give you a feel for how the bond impacts our tax rate and how we're able to maintain that tax neutral bond. So you'll see the lower graphic that is the current year rate, where the general fund, and again, that's that first largest bucket, is currently taxed at $12.75. Next year, we'll be able to lower that general fund amount because our general fund is really at a pretty healthy rate, while then increasing. So the debt services at the bottom is the one that where our bond proceeds will be paid out of. So that will go up to the maximum, which is 405, maintaining that overall aggregate total that's pretty steady at that $18. Nathan mentioned their overall general fund. In Marion, our general fund is right at about $40 million annually, as a comparison.
Yeah, so I think we've really hit this with you again. Just that tax rate is really set by a lot of factors that are established already for us. And like Janelle's mentioned, 80% of our budget is staff and salaries, and so any real changes as far as cutting costs has to come out of that bucket. As far as in closing, on our next slide, just wanted to share some fun things that are happening at Linn-Mar. We opened up 2 new 5th and 6th grade intermediate buildings this year. Absolutely beautiful buildings, great for the kids. We are excited and in the stages of planning some open houses for the communities because we have not had parents due to COVID or community folks in our buildings yet. So look for that to come yet this spring. We're just in the initial stages of planning with that. We're still doing construction at our historic buildings, Bowman, Indian Creek, and Wilkins. Lots of projects that will be started this summer. And we also have ongoing derecho repairs. I believe our derecho insurance claims were close to $2 million from the storm, and we ended up having damage at most every single building, including our operations and maintenance and transportation buildings. So lots of things happening this summer yet from the derecho. 2 new just quick academic things I'll mention is that we implemented one-to-one technology this year. And so our school board moved that purchasing timeline up because of COVID. That's really been a success for us. Having devices in the hands of every kid has really allowed us to do a lot of virtual things throughout the year. And so we're going to continue to work on implementing that and fine-tuning our instructional strategies. Then the last thing I'll mention is our venture academics program. And so Linn-Mar is going to be starting a program that's going to be problem-based learning. And so we've seen a lot from our current partner, the Iowa Big program, has really done a lot in terms of those types of learning for kids and has had a lot of success. And we're looking to build off of that success and start our own program at Linn-Mar next year. So we've actually talked to Janelle. We're going to partner with Marion on that. We've been working with Nick and his team, and so we're really excited to get that up and rolling for the following school year.
Whoops, sorry, there we go. I see Nick is ready for us to move on. So highlights from Marion. First of all, we were very excited last week to see the pass rate for our bond was just at or just under 85% support. So that was just a tremendous support from our community. That $31 million bond will help really fund 4 large projects and then some smaller renovations. But the first project that we will start underway here yet this summer will be an outdoor activities complex at our high school. We will also be working on the plans for a new elementary school that will be located at the Thomas Park Field and will replace Starry. We have renovations that will kick off here at some point next year to Francis Marion Intermediate. And then one of the later projects in our stream will be the new auditorium of approximately 800 seats located at the high school. That auditorium, although one of our high needs, will be one of the later projects just because of the order in which we need to do some of the projects for space availability. And then we also have some smaller renovations at the high school. Other things that are going on at Marion, our derecho repairs are definitely a continuation. We have had somewhere in the range of $6 million thus far, but the total continues to be added on, both to interior and exterior facilities, roof damage to every building within our district at some capacity. So the derecho certainly had an impact, including delaying school for a couple weeks. So June 14th will be our last day of school this year. The other thing that we have as a continuation, certainly in Marion, and you may have heard this recently, we still are in the process of working to adopt a new mascot. So we will hopefully have the right fit for our community at some point in the near future. The other thing that continues to be a big part of our work this year is mitigation efforts around COVID. Both from a health standpoint, but also from the social, emotional, and mental health standpoint for students and for staff, and just making sure that we are cognizant of the fact that COVID is not just physical health, but there have been a lot of stresses and struggles for people throughout our community, and we work to be responsive and really focus on meeting the basic needs for our students first, so that we can ensure we're able to move to the academic needs. So with that, are there any questions for Nathan or I?
Happy to take just a couple questions quick. And I also want to point out, if you haven't seen, Senator Liz Mathis also was able to join us and offered some comments in the chat. So feel free to use the chat as well if you have any additional questions or comments that you'd like to make here. So time for a quick question before we transition to the city.
I'll ask one. Just a quick question on the new auditorium at Marion. How does that compare to the current auditoriums at Marion and Linn-Mar? I've been in both of those, but I'm not sure about how many they seat.
The current auditorium in Marion is just over 300 seats, I believe 320, so it will be significantly more than that. We're trying to keep it at that 800 seat because if we go much above that, it requires a balcony. I'm not sure how much Linn-Mar is.
Yeah, we're around that 800 number as well. And you're right, some of that has to do with size balcony. The other thing that I know as schools look at size of auditoriums, there's some licensing things. Once you get above a certain number, it's much more expensive and costly for certain shows and stuff like that. So I believe ours is right around 860, if I remember, somewhere around that.
Okay, thanks.
Cool. Okay, thanks to both of you for your perspective and information. Lots of great information. Let's pivot and let's see. We talked about that. Let's pivot and hand things over to Lon to provide a little update from a city perspective, and then we'll reserve some time here in the end, hopefully for some additional Q&A and some additional legislative perspective as well for our folks who are on here. So, Lon, take it away.
All right. Thanks, Nick. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So what I wanted to talk about was a little different focus this time around. In past years, I've kind of walked through what the rollback does and some of the impacts that has on the community. So what I wanted to do this year was to really tell the story about what's been happening with some of the long-term investments that we've been making in the community. So if you could jump to the next slide, Nick. So we've made early investments that are really starting to show return. We've got projects like Tower Terrace Road and you can kind of scroll through some of these coming slides, Nick, with Tower Terrace, the Marion Enterprise Center, Nick's favorite project, Easttown Crossing out on the east side of town at 151 and 13, the east end of the Central Corridor, and even some earlier ones like Lincoln View Square and Timberline Manufacturing. So when you look, for example, out at Tower Terrace Road, we've got the new YMCA under construction out there. We've got the fire station headquarters under construction. And this one's kind of exciting because we tried a new initiative out there to target a very specific type of business. And it was based on taking a look at what are the lease rates for that type of business across the metro area. And what we had determined is that they were struggling to lease because subsidized projects in other communities could offer similar grade of space at a lower rate. So we targeted it towards the specific type of business that we were trying to recruit, and I'm happy to report that was successful. So Marion Enterprise Center continues to be a big bright spot for us. I would um, hazard a guess that of all the certified shovel-ready sites in the state, I could make a pretty good argument that ours has been the most successful amongst all of those. In the coming year, you're going to see the construction of a new spec storage space, flex space that the Medco Holding Company has been working on, environmentally controlled storage. And then finally, we're starting to look at doing the last phase of infrastructure out there that would connect Enterprise Drive out to Highway 13. With East End, this is across the road from it. Quickstar is investing in a new truck stop. Even in the face of COVID, we had 3 different food service businesses open out there. They have a market rate apartment complex under construction that's also going to feature some mixed use space. Along the Central Corridor, the East End has been a success story for us with the construction of the new hotel and the associated development around it. On this slide, that top left picture is one that's pretty exciting for us because it's the first redevelopment of a full-on brownfield site on property that the city owned as a remnant parcel from acquiring right-of-way. So it does a couple of different things. It's a residential project. It's income-based, which is the first one we've had developed in the community for ages. So it's addressing a clear market need for us, but also has that verticality and more compact infrastructure that we were looking for. And along this whole corridor, we'll have several other areas that'll be targeted for redevelopment after 6th Avenue is finished. So how does that help the community? It helps us to really build and diversify our property tax base. Our goal has been to become less dependent on residential property taxes and that base because of the volatility. When the school districts talk about being property poor, that's really one of the other factors that shows up in there because of the way that those properties are assessed. And this year they're paying taxes on about 56% of the full value of the property. Compared to commercial and industrial that pays it at 90%. And having that diverse tax base does help to contribute to the city's financial strength. We've maintained a AA1 bond rating for quite a while. There's less than a dozen communities in the state that are able to claim a AA1 or higher bond rating. The only higher one is AAA. But what does that do for us? So we just completed the issuance of new debt and a refinance of an existing debt. And because of the strength of that AAA bond rating, we were able to refinance debt at 0.98% for money that's going to be repaid over 10 years. So we're very protective of that bond rating, but it really pays dividends to the community over time. And the one thing I will continue to build on a little bit as I walk through these is this newer category of multi-residential. That was a new category that was created in 2015. And basically what it is properties that house multiple units. So you think apartment complexes, that were previously assessed as commercial properties are getting shifted over to residential properties instead. And so it moved $45 million in value away from the commercial category over to this new multi-residential, and then they've scaled down the taxable value of those over time. You want to hit the next slide, Nick? So here's what that looks like over time. So prior to 2015, Marion had just under $270 million total of commercial and industrial values on the books. After that took place in 2017, it dropped us back to 217 million. And as of this fiscal year, the assessments that we're using to develop next year's budget, we're back to 303 million. It took us about 4 years to really recover that loss of that $45 million. Since then, we have also seen the multi-residential value grow because we have seen, as we've tried to diversify our housing stock, and as the results of a housing market study that we had done back in 2016, a significant investment in apartment complexes across the community. So the story I wanted to show here is are we making progress? So you look at our valuation growth rates over the last 5 years, and residential has grown at 19.23%, so just a little bit under 20. Commercial has been a little bit brighter spot for us at 29.49. Industrial has really knocked it out of the park at 55.4%, and then you can see that multi-residential is still growing. Now, looking at percentages does kind of mask it a little bit because residential is still such a big percentage of our overall property tax base. We have to have a lot of commercial and industrial just to stay even and not really lose ground. I think some of you on the call I know have heard me say that Marion is really good at building houses, which is great. But at the same time, we have to put a lot of effort into building that commercial and industrial to keep pace, let alone to actually gain ground. So our next challenge really is to continue that track record of strong growth that we've had, but also then adapt to any changes that COVID and the derecho might create in the market. So what's the impact of all that work? Really, for the last 4 years, we've been able to stay very steady on the property tax rates. Now, if I show you a chart like this for the residential side, it looks very different. It pops up and down, but that's because taxable value on houses changes year over year and follows the rollback rate. With commercial and industrial being fixed at 90%, the rate has a very direct impact on the amount of taxes that you pay. You can see in 2018 that we did take a jump. That was really the first year that we saw the impacts of some property tax reforms that started to hit in 2017. It pushed our tax rate up as the tax, if you want to call it the tax burden, shifted from commercial and industrial more over to the residential side. But since then, we've really been able to keep it steady to the point that the budget that is going to the city council next year has the rate reduced a couple of pennies and means that on a per $100,000 of value, businesses would be paying less than they were 3 years ago. And one of the things that I would be remiss if I didn't point it out is that budget for FY22 includes the first part of the local share for the derecho recovery costs. And so we were able to do that while still keeping that tax rate steady and actually take it down slightly. I wish I could promise you that that's what the case would be in future years, but until we get certainty on what our total cost for that is, we wanted to make sure that it was critical coming out of the derecho that we held this line as hard as we could. So how about that derecho? What did it do? I don't want to belabor the point here since we all lived through it, but here's a snapshot of how we fit it into our budget. So our overall estimated cost, worst case scenario, we budgeted at 43 million, anticipating that 85% of that would come from state and federal sources. That would leave a local share at 65 or 6.5 million. This is a spot that if I could, since we have a few legislators on the call, I'll point out something that I think the state needs to take a look at is in disasters like this, the state share, the state contribution is actually lower than the local contribution. The state's putting in 20% with the expectation that we do 15. But for all of this work that we do, when you look at income taxes, payroll taxes, sales taxes produced, the state benefits far more from development than we do. And I think it's worth taking a look at whether or not that share ought to be flipped. So overall, this works out figuring new census population somewhere around 41,000. The local share, again, worst case scenario is about $158 a person, about $439 if you break it out according to address. So for all the services we've been able to provide, it is not free, but we're doing everything we can to moderate costs. And hopefully the final costs will come in substantially lower than that. So if you want to come into Marion and continue to help us work on diversifying that tax base, we do have a lot of opportunities across the community. There's still space available in the Enterprise Center out along Tower Terrace Road. We have parcels available on the Central Corridor, and including more that will be coming up, Marion Boulevard and out along Lindale Drive. Medco, really does a great job of keeping tabs on available properties for building sites and on facilities that might be coming up. So that's somebody that you should keep at the top of your contact list if you do want to look for space. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was to really focus in a little bit more on redevelopment around the community, because we've really seen this start to get traction with Blair's Ferry. The Timberline made a significant reinvestment in Marion. And we were seeing a lot of redevelopment in our uptown even before the derecho really forced the issue on some of our buildings. The new building that Tomaso's has put up really took what was a community eyesore and added some nice commercial space for them, along with some of our first new residential units. And the Broad and Main project that is coming to the Marion Square Mall site is really going to transform and change the face of uptown. From our perspective, redevelopment has a lot of benefits because it doesn't require new utilities or street reconstructions or street extensions. And for Janelle's benefit, it really helps out the Marion Independent School District. We're looking forward to having more happen at that Broad and Main site. And with the construction of the new library, that site will be coming available. And then there's other parcels that with the anticipated completion this year of 6th Avenue, we'll be able to put out on the market. So just to give you a little point of comparison, I don't have a slide on this, but just to reinforce the point that when you talk about communities being property poor and why this is so critical for us, if you look at some of our closest analogs across the state, figure Marion's around 41,000 people, our total value comes in at about $3.1 billion. Bettendorf, with a population of around 34,000, has a value in excess of $4 billion. And Cedar Falls, which in many ways is our closest analog, has a value on the books of just a little bit ahead of us at 3.2 billion. But their population includes 12,000 students over at the university, and they're not responsible for police protection and a whole host of services that UNI provides for those citizens. So their 3.2 billion goes to serve a much smaller proportional resident base than ours. And then finally, the other closest analog, they're a little bit ahead of us, I would say, is probably Urbandale, and they're sitting out there at 5.6 billion, with maybe 10% more population than we do. So getting those numbers more in balance is just going to have to be a continuing focus for us. We've gained some ground, but it still has to be something that we continue to work on year after year. And we've got some big projects coming in the next 2 years that should really help us achieve that.
The goods and the bads of being a high growth residential community, right? So hopefully in 5 years we can look at those charts and those percentages of growth rates and maintain that 50% plus industrial growth rate and high percentage of commercial to continue to complement obviously our residential side. But you guys have seen how important that is through Lon's presentation and also through the school's presentation. My goal by the time I retire is that the school district stop using that word property poor, because we've done great things as a community, so I get it. So that's what we have for slides here real quick. We do have a few minutes left, and I know that Senator Mathis and Representative McClintock are on here. Does anybody have any questions in reaction to some of Lon's content? I hear this, I guess it's this afternoon now. So Lon, as he was wrapping up some of his slides, he was talking about redevelopment. And as we transition to maybe giving our legislators a couple of moments to react to any of this or add additional perspective from the state level, I'll put in a plug. There's some great policy bills out there to support the expansion and continuation of the Brownfield-Grayfield tax credit program. Those are programs that have been critical to us reclaiming and redeveloping, especially in the core of our community, many of our older industrial sites that used to be on the edge of the community that are now the center of the community. So we are huge advocates for that bill and that policy working its way through the legislature right now. As far as really a redevelopment tool, it's new development, but in our community, it's been big on redevelopment, and that's the Workforce Housing Tax Credit Program. So that's a program that allows developers to build market rate housing units and typically those end up, at least in our community, we've been successful on those being geared towards redevelopment sites. So the Broad and Main project that Lon mentioned, the old Marion Square Mall Plaza, that was awarded workforce housing tax credits several years ago. That project would not work without the assistance of that tool. When you think about the expenses of purchasing, preparing, remediating, just prepping an infill site, those are critical tools. We talk about a project called the Green Park Apartments project. It's the redevelopment of the Marion YMCA site. They will be applying for workforce housing tax credits. They don't have those yet. So it's really important that we get those bills through, because whether it's rural Iowa or urban Iowa, the costs of developing these projects are very similar. So anyway, a little tie into some policy that I know you guys are chewing on in Des Moines. But I'll just pause at that and see if there are just a few remarks that we might hear from our legislators here on the call after everybody's home recuperating from another long week in Des Moines. Senator Mathis, would you like the first words, or I'll open it up to you.
I'm going to let Charlie go ahead, because he probably has more energy than I do. They've been passing better bills over there.
Well, and some of you maybe have not had the chance to be introduced to Representative McClintock. So he has the seat that was vacated by Louis Zumbaugh when he retired from the House, and is now one of our Lynn County Board of Supervisors. So, Mr. McClintock, welcome, and I'd offer the floor to you if you had anything you wanted to offer to the group here. Thank you for taking some time on your busy Friday to join us.
Yes, sorry I had to drop off there, or hit my thing a couple times. Those were phone calls, so that were either other representatives or constituents. So I'm trying to balance several things here today, but I do appreciate being invited. The information is always valuable, especially when it comes to schools. School budgets are so unique, so I never want to pass up an opportunity to learn more about them. I was not happy with the way that the funding went this year, especially with the SSA. My wife is an educator, and so many of the people that we work with and hang around with, of course, are educators. That just happens when you have that. And I ran on education, and I try to attend all the forums that I can with education. So I take that very seriously. The SSA that was put in at 2.4, I didn't care for that. If you followed that particular vote, you'll know that I was one of two Republicans that voted against that. It passed, of course, but I didn't particularly care for that. So, and I know that Senator Mathis is also very strong proponent of the schools and education. So, and I'm sure she'll speak on that herself. But anyway, that's what I just want to throw that piece in there about education. So you do have a strong proponent with me when it comes to that particular subject. So the development in Marion, of course, I only have a small portion of Marion, some more addresses really than actually any of Marion proper, but I'm always interested in what's going on in Lynn County, and the information there is also very important. I know that that you folks are probably following the TIF bill, and I am watching that as well as some of the other economic bills that are going on. There wasn't, I wouldn't say there was anything this week that would have been controversial or anything that would have any direct impacts, but there are some more economic bills that'll be coming up as early as next week in the House. So we'll have to keep an eye on those things. If there's specific questions that you have over a bill that's either passed or come up, or funding in the future or some impact, I'd be happy to answer any of those questions, and or any opinion on either state budget or information or the pandemic or COVID. I mean, not COVID, but the derecho. So I guess you've covered so much broad information. I'm not sure exactly what you want to know.
No, that's fair. We appreciate it. We just thank you for taking time to join us, and thank you for being. You mentioned the TIF bill. That's a bill that we're watching in the economic development world very closely, and so Charlie and I had a nice conversation about that bill earlier in the week. So, Senator Mathis, how about the floor is yours for a few minutes?
I know how you're watching that TIF bill, Nick. We talk about that a lot. I want to go back to school funding. Charlie is a friend to schools, and we're so glad that he is in the House, and we're on the same wavelength in regard to our schools. 2.4 is okay, but it's not enough. As you heard from Lynn-Mar and Marion, that we're going to see probably some effects of that. What we really want to work towards is an SSA that is going to cover smaller class sizes, because we know that learning, and retention achievement increases when we can get smaller class sizes. And it really puts superintendents in a corner when they can't do that. And then they're just really swimming upstream when, it's time to show that they've closed achievement gaps, or we have retention. So it does affect our numbers. I'm glad to see our dropout rates are so low, and that's something that we can certainly champion. But we have to keep working on it. If we're going to be number one, it's a fight to the top, right? You got to hold on to that place. We have a tax bill that's coming through the Senate, and the argument about it is cutting taxes. The argument about it is we have so much revenue flowing in from the federal government right now in regards to the CARES Act, and money to the state, money flowing out to cities and counties, that we don't really have a good track on it. We know how much has come in, but we don't know how that might be inflating our numbers somewhat. And when this all kind of comes to rest, when people are going back to work, when we get kids back in school, when we're kind of back, everybody's vaccinated and we're kind of getting back to a normal, if there ever will be again, a normal pace, what will our revenues look like? We'll be waiting for the REC, the Revenue Estimating Conference numbers that come out, I think, on the 15th of this month, so halfway through the month. And then we'll probably gauge from that. So David Roederer had been, our budget director. Now it's Michael Buslow, who had been the chief of staff for Kim Reynolds and left, and now is back as, as the director of the budget, the state budget. So we're hoping that we hear from him and that these numbers are going to look good. We're hoping that they look rosy, but also there are going to be some blemishes in there. So do you do a big tax bill this year, or do you do it next year? And that's what I think we're going to be, we'll probably, there'll be some friction there. People wanting to wait to just see the fallout and then, and then proceed. Nick, you brought up housing. Yes, that's it. Bipartisan support. That's a yes. Brownfield, Grayfields. Yes. And Lon Pluckin was able to give his 2 cents to IEDA about that, and that was good. So, that's a positive. Broadband. So I know that a lot of people on this call want to know if broadband, if we're going to get the money. Again, it comes down to arguing over, is 450 million the number that that everybody wants to set their sights on. The governor says 450 million is needed. I agree. Over a period of a few years, we can afford it. We can do it. And when you see, I just saw a map on telehealth. So where telehealth is being done and where mental health access points are across the state, and then you put it over the top of a broadband map, we have a lot of work to do. And we have a lot of work to do with schools and broadband. And it's not only just getting broadband out to areas, but it's also increasing the quality of the broadband that we already have, because some of it is old, and we have to increase some of that quality. So my 2 cents on that. We've just had a really difficult session. I think a lot of argument, a lot of political argument. You may see in the newspaper that it's just not really for me personally, what we should be talking about this year. We've had a derecho. We're in the middle of COVID still. We haven't recovered fully from that, and we never will. Dr. Padati says that COVID will always be out there, just like influenza A and B. We will not eradicate COVID-19. It will always be there in some form or another. Polio is still active in India and Pakistan, and We almost eradicated it, but did not. So, we probably will, more than likely, when you go to get your influenza A and B shot, you'll get a booster shot. And we're talking about what that looks like next fall and how we'll proceed with vaccination, and boosters in our nursing homes, in our schools, all of that all over again, because the immunization or the vaccine can only last so long. And so we're looking at that in the future. We're trying to figure out what the state's going to look like with commercial real estate. If everybody's going to go back downtown, where they're going to be working, how does that affect our budget? How does that affect a business budget? We like to talk with the Small Business Administration, women-owned businesses. How could we help them, in the struggle? Because really, a lot of women have been taken out of the workforce, and that affects childcare and it affects state revenues. So we've got a very deep list to try to get done. And I'm frustrated because we're talking about the death penalty, and we're talking about some other trans bathrooms. Could we just kind of swim through that? Just put those things aside and get to the heart of our arguments, the things that really make economic development grow and are the heartbeat of our state and our cities and our counties. So those are my 2 cents.
We're starting to hear, I think on the Senate side, you talk about the tax bill and this idea of trying to eliminate some triggers. Next week will probably tell if that has much for legs, but saw some headlines. I don't know if I was reading in the Wall Street Journal this morning, somewhere this morning, about this idea that the state's going to be receiving more money from the federal government that may prohibit a state's ability from cutting taxes. Is that idea alone really have legs for potentially sidelining anyone's effort of even talking about this?
I don't know. The governor is, she's joined with a couple of others, 21 other states, saying that blue states are getting, we're paying, that political argument. If you read the Business Insider, I know that a lot of people do, they have a really good article, a couple of articles out, one today and one yesterday, just on where the stimulus is going, how will it affect our economy and our communities, and where the money back to the states is going, and how that will also affect, not only our state, but our economies. I'd urge you to read those. It kind of lays it out between fact and fiction, because I think the political argument is in there. The political, try to swim through that again, just try to look at the numbers, the raw numbers, what's being sent, what we're going to use it on, and how it has been decided of how much you're going to get. California and New York are being criticized right now about that money and that their fair share, but they give a lot more money to the federal government than what they're getting back. And I'm not in defense of New York or California, but we're getting 2.9 billion more than what we give the federal government back in this round. So.
Thank you, Senator Mathis. Always appreciate you being here as well. Any questions for either of these two or any of our speakers here before we wrap up this afternoon?
I guess one thing I just wanted to bring up, Nick, is that mainly for Charlie's benefit, there's a bill out there, HSB 171, that would prohibit communities from protecting lawful source of income in our civil rights ordinances. Marion is one of 3 cities that has that. And just to give you a little bit of perspective, in 5 years, we've only had 1 case brought on that, and it was brought with a couple of other counts, and our Civil Rights Commission did determine that the tenant was being discriminated against by the landlord, but the account was not on income. It was due to one of the other provisions in the Civil Rights Ordinance. So in many ways, I don't know what the experience of the other communities has been, but at least for Marion, that's kind of a solution in search of a problem.
71. Okay. I will take a look at that. I'm not familiar with that one. It's in a study bill right now, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I will take a look at it. It's probably in state or local government or something, or maybe HR or something, but I'll take a look at it and see where it's, I'll look at it. It's post funnel, but I'll take a look at it. So
yeah, it's HJ 563 now.
Oh, it's a joint. Okay, all right.
Yeah,
all right.
we passed it in the Senate on party lines.
Okay.
So that'll flag for you, Charlie. You'll be able to see I stood up and spoke, in defense of Marion, as did our Story County Senator Herman Kornbach, who represents Ames, and then also Des Moines electeds also spoke up against it. So,
Okay.
against the bill. So,
Who was the
it's
floor
bad
manager?
for Marion.
Who was the floor manager in the Senate?
The floor manager in the Senate, I don't, I can look it up. I can't
can look
remember who
I
the
can look
floor
it up.
manager was, but
I
but we voted party lines and we tried to defend it as best we could. A lot, like Gary Grant and Larry Murphy contacted us. I called Lon, or I emailed Lon and Mayor Nick and asked them just, to tell me about have we had any problems with this? Is it positive? How did it come about? And they filled me in. So I used some of that information as I was debating that day. So
I'll take care of it, Lon.
thanks.
Okay.
Any other questions before we wrap up? Well, thanks everybody for your time. We appreciate it as always. Not necessarily exciting topics, but very important ones as it relates to today and the future of our community. So we're just really proud to have a leadership team that can come together to talk about these things and really be collaborative throughout the entire year. So thanks to everyone. Thank you to our couple of legislators for always being accessible for us. And have a great spring break for those of you that get to enjoy that.